The air on Kurukshetra was thick, not with dust, but with something older, something heavier. It was the weight of broken promises, the silence of unspoken duties. The sky was not blue. It was a bruised purple, streaked with veins of angry orange. The sun felt distant, a cold witness to the drama about to unfold. On one side stood the Pandava forces, their flags snapping in a wind that carried no relief. On the other, the Kaurava legions, a sea of steel and ambition. This was not just a field of battle. This was a crucible. It was a place where Dharma would be tested by fire. And everyone present knew, deep in their bones, that the world would be unmade and remade by the deeds of this day. Warriors stood like statues carved from tension. Each breath was a conscious effort. Each heartbeat was a drum pounding out a rhythm of impending doom. Arjuna, the peerless archer, gripped his divine bow, Gandhava. His knuckles were white. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where his own family stood as his enemy. He saw his grandsire, Bhishma. He saw his teacher, Drona. A tremor ran through him, a conflict not of armies, but within his own soul. He felt the universe holding its breath, waiting for the first arrow, the first life to be offered to the thirsty soil of this cursed field. The very ground seemed to hum with anticipation, a low thrum that vibrated through the soles of every soldier's feet. The conch shells finally blew. Their sound was not a call to glory. It was a mournful cry, a cosmic sigh for the end of an era. The sound ripped through the charged silence, shattering the fragile peace. For a single, eternal moment, nothing happened. The sound echoed and faded, leaving behind an even deeper quiet. Then, with a roar that seemed to tear the sky, the army surged forward. The ground trembled as millions of feet began their final march. This was the start of the great churning, a churning of blood and dharma, a churning from which a new, perhaps poisoned reality would emerge. The age of innocence was over. The first clash was a symphony of chaos. Metal met metal. Chariots splintered. Horses screamed. Yet in the heart of the storm, time began to warp. A soldier's dying gasp stretched into a silent poem of regret. A drop of sweat rolling down a warrior's temple became a slow, glistening tear for the world that was being lost. The grand, terrible dance had begun. Every participant was both a dancer and a victim, caught in a web of fate spun long before they were born. Their choices, their actions, their very lives were now offerings to the great fire of war. The yagna of Kurukshetra demanded its price, and the payment was in blood and righteousness. Arjuna's focus narrowed. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and color. Only one target remained. Bhishma, the grandsire, the immovable mountain. Arjuna's heart hammered against his ribs. This was not just a warrior. This was his grandfather, the man who had bounced him on his knee. The blood in his veins screamed in protest. Hypertension was a cold fire licking at his mind, making his vision swim. He could feel the pressure behind his eyes, a physical manifestation of his tortured dharma. To fight or not to fight? To kill a man he loved for a kingdom he was not sure he wanted. Krishna's words were a distant echo, a philosophical balm on a gaping wound. Opposite him, Bhishma stood serene, but it was the serenity of a storm's eye. He had the boon of choosing his own death, yet here he stood, choosing to fight for a cause he knew was adharma. His blood pressure was a silent tide, rising with each advancing Pandava soldier. He saw the faces of his grandchildren charging towards him, their eyes filled with a righteous fury he himself had helped to nurture. Every beat of his ancient heart was a question. Why? Why this path? Why this sacrifice? He was a prisoner of his own vow, a general shackled by his own word. The weight of his promise was heavier than any armor, more suffocating than any poison. The tension between them was a physical thing. It was a shimmering cord of energy stretching across the battlefield. It vibrated with unspoken love and unspeakable duty. When Arjuna finally drew his bowstring, the world seemed to slow to a crawl. The sinew of the Gandiva creaked, a sound that seemed to last for an eternity. He could see every line on Bhishma's face, every strand of his white beard fluttering in the wind. This was the moment of decision, the point of no return. The arrow he was about to loose would not just kill a man, it would kill a part of himself. It would forever alter the meaning of family, of loyalty, of dharma. Drona, the master archer, watched from his chariot. His heart was a battlefield of its own. He saw his favorite student, Arjuna, aiming at his own commander, Bhishma. He felt the impossible conflict tear him apart. He was bound by his salt, his loyalty to Hastinapura. But his heart was with the Pandavas, the boys he had trained and loved. The stress was a physical pain, a tightening in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He felt his pulse throb in his temples, a frantic drumbeat of divided loyalties. He knew that no matter who won this war, a part of him would lose. The entire field was a stage for these internal wars, fought with more ferocity than any physical weapon. Arjuna released the arrow. It was not a normal arrow. It was a Pashupatastra, a weapon of the gods, gifted by Shiva himself. As it left the bow, time fractured. The missile blazed with an otherworldly light, a sliver of cosmic destruction. It moved in agonizing slow motion, its journey across the field a spectacle of terrible beauty. It left a trail of shimmering energy, warping the very air around it. Soldiers on both sides paused, their own small battles forgotten, their eyes wide with awe and terror. They were witnessing a power not meant for mortal hands, a force that could unmake creation. The weapon was a testament to the gods' favor, and also their terrifying indifference. As the Pashupatastra flew, it began to multiply. One arrow became 1,000, 1,000,000. A rain of celestial fire descended upon the Kaurava ranks. Each point of light was a promise of swift, absolute annihilation. In the suspended reality of slow motion, one could see the effect on the soldiers below. A look of disbelief on a man's face as the light touched his armor, which then dissolved into incandescent dust. The silent scream of a chariot driver as his vehicle and horses were consumed by a fire that burned without heat, simply erasing them from existence. It was a clean, silent, and profoundly terrifying form of destruction. Bhishma raised his own celestial weapon in response. His astra met Arjuna's in midair. The collision was not a loud explosion, it was a silent implosion of reality. A sphere of pure white emptiness appeared between the two armies, sucking in light, sound, and dust. For a moment, the entire battlefield was plunged into an unnatural silence, a void where the laws of physics ceased to exist. Warriors felt the impact not in their ears, but in their souls. A deep psychic shockwave that rattled their conviction and filled them with a primal dread. This was no longer a war of men. It had become a contest of gods, and they were merely the grass trampled by the celestial elephants. From this void, ripples of energy expanded outwards. They moved slowly, like waves in thick honey. As they passed over the land, the ground itself changed. Grass turned to glass, rocks crumbled into fine sand. The very memory of what the land used to be was being rewritten by the power of these divine weapons. The sky bled new, impossible colors. The fight was scarring the world itself, leaving behind a wound that might never heal. The warriors understood then that victory would be hollow. The land they fought for was being destroyed in the process of being won, poisoned by the very power they used to claim it. The battle raged on, but something had broken. The initial fury was gone, replaced by a grim mechanical determination. Each warrior was now an island of grief fighting in a sea of sorrow. Arjuna's movements were precise, but they lacked their earlier grace. He was no longer a divine artist of war. He was an executioner carrying out a sentence. Every arrow he fired felt heavy, soaked in the invisible tears of his own conscience. He looked across the field, at the faces of his kin, and saw only ghosts. He was winning the battle, but losing his world. The hypertension had subsided, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The impact on the land was profound. Kurukshetra was no longer a field. It was a graveyard of dharma. The divine weapons had left permanent scars, patches of earth where nothing would ever grow again. The air itself felt different, thin and sorrowful. The rivers that flowed nearby were said to run red for years, not just with blood, but with the memory of the adharma that had transpired. The place became a monument to a war that should never have been fought, a testament to the destructive power of pride and greed. It was a wound on the face of the earth, a constant reminder of the day the world was torn apart. In the aftermath, the survivors walked as if in a dream. The cries of victory were muted, choked by the scale of the loss. Yudhishthira, the righteous king, looked upon the kingdom he had won and felt no joy. The price had been too high. The throne he would sit on was built on the bones of his family. The crown he would wear was forged in the fire of their funeral pyres. The silence of the dead was louder than any cheer. This was the ultimate lesson of Kurukshetra. A victory that feels like a defeat is no victory at all. The war had ended, but the suffering had just begun. The echoes of that battle would reverberate for generations. The stories would be told and retold, not as tales of glory, but as warnings. They served as a reminder that even the most righteous of causes can be corrupted by violence. The slow-motion horror of that day, the divine fire, the silent screams, the strained faces of family fighting family, became etched into the consciousness of the culture. The hypertension of the warriors on the field was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a dharma that had become so rigid and complex that it had turned upon itself. The Great War was over, but the great questions it raised would haunt humanity forever.